Good evening everyone and welcome to another Total Education lecture on our YouTube channel. We hope you've enjoyed all our lectures, and tonight I'm going to be talking about Charlotte from Lost in Translation. Now Charlotte's an interesting character and we look at her in a lot of different ways, and many people like her as a character and other people don't like her so much as a character, and there's been lots of negative criticism in a lot of the film journals about Charlotte, that she's a spoilt first world or developed world child who doesn't really deserve our sympathy or empathy, and that she has characteristics that are symptomatic of the materialism really of the world. I don't necessarily agree with those, and I'd like to talk about it tonight and try and prove to you that she's more deeper and interesting character than that, and she is certainly a bright and well managed character. Coppola's construction of her is very interesting through the film, and I do think she engenders our sympathy. She is, of course, the sort of main character, with Bob Harris in the film, and Charlotte's husband is sort of on the periphery, and I'll talk a little bit about him later, but let's have a look at Charlotte's main characteristics first and work out how she fits into the world as such, because that's really what a lot of the film's about, is about her trying to enter the world and trying to forge a place for herself and a path for herself. And I'll give you a few quotes a bit later on to help you out with that. Charlotte is seemingly aimless and pointless in her life at the beginning of the film, and I think the whole film really is, in many ways, for her section of the film anyway, a search for something. And certainly she goes about this search in a very definite and constructive way for a person who seems barely aimless. And I think one of the quotes that you would be looking at for Charlotte is the quote where she says, "I just don't know what I'm supposed to be." And I think that's a very important quote for her. And another quote that would fit in with that very well for her is where she says, "You're probably," Bob says to her, "What are you doing?" And she says, "My husband's a photographer, so he's here working. I wasn't doing anything, so I came along." And Bob says, "What do you do?" And she says, "I'm not sure yet, actually." And those two quotes are very, very important. And although Charlotte seems to be a bright, successful and attractive young woman, and we see her in that opening scene with the bottom shot, I suppose it's called, and it's become sort of an iconic shot in film historiography, and certainly a wonderful opening to this film, and interesting in the fact that Coppola tries to portray her in this way, that Charlotte's not just an intellectual Yale graduate, but she also has different aspects to her. And I think that shot opens up that for Coppola and opens the audience into looking at her in a lot of different ways. And I think that shot's not just like a sort of physical thing. It opens up, and it's that backdrop of the Tokyo skyline as well. And I think you'll find that's very important. Have a look at that scene again. She's, as I said, bright, young, Yale educated, and certainly very, very unhappy in her marriage to John. And John himself is an interesting character and sort of very, very different in many ways to Charlotte. He's a self-absorbed workaholic who can't even recognise the sexual advances. He's so wrapped up. And those scenes are very important, where he's on the ground digging through his camera equipment, getting ready to pack and go away, and she walks past him sort of in her underwear, and he doesn't even look up, he doesn't even glance up at her, and he doesn't even recognise the fact that she's there in many ways. And there's a great lack of communication, and obviously in many ways that's what the film's about in the modern world, that lack of communication in the modern world and searching for something. And I think that their relationship exemplifies that and typifies that in many ways, and it's very important. And I think the other quote that you could look at with Charlotte, where she feels like she's a failure. She says to Bob, "I tried taking pictures, but they were so mediocre. I guess every girl goes through a photography phase. Horses, taking pictures of your feet." And that sort of sums her up in many ways. She feels that she's very neglected, and she's neglected herself. And we see this in a couple of scenes. Let's have a look at one. The trip to Kyoto, for example, is one where she goes to Kyoto, and she's always seems to be restless and searching, and And the sense of restlessness and searching for something is, of course, highlighted in the scenes on the Tokyo subway where she's traveling and moving and looking for direction. And in Kyoto, she look at the photography there and the framework of the scenes and how she's portrayed there. And it's that wistfulness and that desire to look back at different culture and look back at the past and look back at tradition to try and find something about herself. I think you'll find those scenes are very relevant and very important. She's searching for something, and really, in many ways, she's searching for a meaning to her life. And we see that in the tape that she didn't really denies as hers, a soul search. And I think that sums up in many ways what she's doing, that the title, A Soul Search. And she is indeed in a film, a lost soul. So what does she find with Bob? And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. Does she find any solutions? Obviously, she turns to a family at one point with her phone call home to Lauren and tries to decide and work out there and talk to Lauren about it. But Lauren's engaged, much like Lydia in many ways, Bob's wife, that Lauren's not interested because she has her own family problems and social issues that she needs to deal with. And the problems of the soul, the more philosophical things and the search for life aren't important. They're lost in that materialism and the world of things and consumerism. And I think that that's another important aspect that you need to look at. The things she tries don't work. She also tries writing, as we find out later, and her writing was no good either. So she really is looking for something to do in her life. And you need to look at why Coppola gets her into those traditional things. We look at her visit to the temple. We look at the traditional marriage ceremony that she sees. We look at the flower arranging, that typical and very, very Japanese art of Ikebana. And I think you'll find that when she's reaching back into tradition, she's searching for something that's missing probably in her life, in that modern life. And that generation that has sort of moved to the future, and it's all about technology and it's all about pace and movement. And, the world for these people is a very small place, but yet they seem lost in it. Well, Charlotte certainly is lost in it. John, not so much. John has his work, and his work's very, as a photographer, very go-getting, and he mixes with a specific sort of person. And he prefers London, and New York and all those sorts of places to a settled life. And he sees the world as, his workplace really, and that's very different. Another character that you might look at would be, in contrast to Charlotte, would be Kelly. And she is a very, very urbane, world-wise person without being intelligent at all. She just fits into that world perfectly because she can sort of blather along, and we see that at a press conference. And probably one quote that typifies that very well is when she is giving that press conference, and she says things like, when she's talking about her relationship with Keanu Reeves, who was in the latest hit movie with her, and we both have 2 dogs and we both live in LA, so we have all these different things in common. And she gets away with comments like that because in reality, Kelly is perfect for this new modern world. She certainly navigates the global life in many ways, and she's into things, she talks about Japanese food, and she talks about yoga, and she talks about karate, and she does all these things that seem very hip and cool and come from different cultures. And she's sort of an amorphous character in that way, that she's not necessarily a child of America, but she's a child of the world, and she's happy to collect things from all over the world. And in many ways, that's what Charlotte's trying to do on a far more sophisticated level. So it's nice to have a look at Kelly and see Kelly's role in the film, and we see when they're together that Charlotte's much brighter than Kelly, and certainly, but not as happy, and certainly not as well adapted and well adjusted to the world. And you need to work out for yourself what you think Coppola's saying there, in the sense of how individuals come to terms with the world. So what else can we say about Charlotte, and what else can we talk about? I think Charlotte, in many ways, with that search for the meaning of life and the wandering that she does, and the search for tradition and the search for self, Charlotte comes across in many ways as childlike. And we see that a lot, I think, in her relationship with Bob. And while there's a sort of seeming sexual tension between them, Bob also sees her in many ways as a daughter or a protege, and he talks to her about marriage, and he's sort of mocking in that sense about marriage and all those sorts of things. And, you sleep for a lot of your marriage, and so that knocks a lot of it off, and all those sorts of roles. And I think that childlike status for her is allowing her in the film to develop new ideas and learn a little bit more about herself and the way that she interacts with the world and the way that she negates some of the problems that the world has thrust upon her in many ways. And while critics have suggested that she does lead a very privileged life in many ways, she went to Yale, which is one of the top colleges, and she's flying all around the world on a whim sort of thing, that there is something deeper missing in her life, and the superficiality of what seems to be a wonderful global life certainly doesn't have the depth for her or the need meet her needs in any way. And Bob does that for her because he communicates with her, and she just looks for that communication. And I think with Bob we see the humour in her that no other character brings out, and certainly she doesn't carry through in her normal life. The laughter she has with Bob and the lines she gives with him. And I'll give you one example of that. When they're talking in their early stages, they are at the bar, and she says to him, "You're probably just having a midlife crisis. Did you buy a Porsche yet?" And some of those other lines that she whips with him. Of course, you need to look very carefully and closely at that really iconic film scene of the crane shot when they're both lying on the bed. And, we've talked about in some of the other videos key scenes. Well, this for their relationship and probably for the movie's a key scene. It's the closest they come. Physically, they're very close here, and our expectation is in many ways that a sexual relationship will develop out of that on the bed, but it doesn't. And I think that's anticlimactic in many ways, and a brilliant piece of cinematography on Coppola's part. Not only is the shot perfect and a mimicry of the John Lennon Yoko Ono cover of Rolling Stone where they're lying on the bed, but the other image here is that he touches her, but it's not a sexual touching. It's far more tender, and it gives a sense of communication between the two figures, and certainly that scene's perfect for the film. And I think the critics have discussed in many ways whether they should have had a sexual relationship, how it would have changed the film. Probably that's not necessary for our complete understanding of the film in the way we're looking at it in terms of how the characters interact with the world. But in many ways it's worth thinking about because it certainly would change the way they interacted with the world. Note how in that scene, and I want you to pay, when you talk about the scene, talk about those film techniques and how it builds that sense of communication and how individuals interact with the world and each other. And they've been sort of building up to this scene in many ways. And note how he touches her and how intimate it is, yet in no way does it come across as sexual. Charlotte and Bob are both after more things. They're certainly after more spiritual answers, and a physical relationship, while it might appeal to the audience and work out as a good thing and a positive thing, certainly wouldn't make it work for the film and what we're looking for. So in summing up now, what do we need to think about Charlotte? We've talked through all the issues that she's looking for. We've talked about some of the other characters. You need to decide for yourself how she interacts with the world. Well, one tip that I would give you for this is, how do we see her at the end of the film? Has she come to any conclusions? Does she seem happier? She certainly smiles when Bob whispers in her ear at the end and walks away and leaves, and she seems determined to look at something and find something a little bit better for her life and what she's doing. Can we criticise her as sport, privileged and clueless? Well, I don't think so, but some people see that in her and don't like her as a character, and you might like to think about that. But more importantly for us, how does she interact with the world at the start of the film? How does she develop her commentary and interactions with the world throughout the film? And how do we see her at the end of the film? And I think I've given you some of the answers on the way through. If you're looking for more tips and information, certainly on any of the texts that you're doing and any English themes or literary works, go to our website, totaleducationcentre.com.au, because on that site we have many lectures and notes, worksheets and things that will help you understand better the techniques. Also, don't forget to contact us through the YouTube channel if you have any suggestions for text you'd like done, and we'll make a video of those just for you. Don't forget, totaleducationcentre.com.au. Thank you.